I'm Nikki Agate. I work for the Modern Language Association, so I'm also in charge of this website that you all see before you, and I would I'm not actually, Catherine asked me to talk not with my MLA hat on, but with my Alt-Ac hat on. But first of all, I would love those of you that are involved in these programs, the rhetoric and composition training, the fellowships in academic administration, if you would consider writing something up about those and contributing them to this website. You'll be contributing to the national conversation, and hopefully we'll get more and more people with an idea of what's going on in other places, and it can be a space for us to get ideas from one another. Okay, take that hat off. So I am the product of that famed urban French department whose chair said, if you accept anything less than a tenure track position, you are betraying your training. But what my training had taught me was that I didn't want a tenure track position, or at least I didn't want one in a department such as my own. I wanted a more social humanities that seemed possible within the constraints of the current academic culture, something that spoke across silos and that invited conversation. I had written a very interdisciplinary dissertation, one which it was intimated to me would make it very difficult for me to find a job. And indeed, French is still a very traditional discipline with a strict canon, and often it doesn't want to explore beyond its boundaries. As an example, in 2012, I attended the Digital Humanities Summer Institute in Victoria, and of the 500 scholars there from all over the US and Canada, I was the only one in French. But that Summer Institute was a watershed moment for me because I met librarians and publishers and educational technologists and museum workers who were all thinking and creating and collaborating beyond the ivory tower. And they all had that way of thinking about the world that Jesse Allen mentioned earlier. They all loved what they were doing, and they made me realize that I could choose not to be an academic and still do the kind of work I wanted to do. Of course, I wasn't quite sure what that looked like yet. And in the absence of any kind of departmental support and in ignorance of the Campus Career Center, I started applying for a whole range of jobs that required a PhD without thinking about whether or not they were right for me. And this, by the way, is another result of our graduate training. This belief that we should be grateful for any job, no matter its working conditions, wherever it's located, whatever the pay. So if you guys are in a position to change that, let your grad students have some self-respect. All of which means that I ended up, first of all, in a job that was not right for me. In brief, the company culture was extremely corporate, as siloed as any academic department, and I was expected to serve as a panacea to the fact that they didn't know anything about the people, academics, that used their products. But it took me a while and 3 changes of management and as many corporate reorgs for me to admit that I wasn't happy. And it took me a while longer to realize I could do something about it. Because outside the academy, you can change jobs. In fact, you're expected to. It's completely normal. And the job you leave will have given you new skills and experience that you'll be able to take elsewhere. Yes. So I have no doubt that the experience I gained in my former position was crucial to me getting my current position, which also required a PhD, and this time in a humanities field. It's the MLA after all. So the work I do now with Connected Academics and in the Office of Scholarly Communication at the MLA has me fully involved in that kind of social collaborative humanities, that in transdisciplinary humanities that I felt was lacking in my own academic experience. But it took me making some mistakes to get here. And that's okay, because you know what? It's normal. According to my former department, though, I betrayed my training. And like anyone else who has accepted anything less than a tenure track position, I'm not listed on the placement page of their website. Discussions such as those today will go a long way towards changing such culture. And I'm grateful to all of you who are in a position to make changes for just being here and listening and being open to change. I'm grateful to Catherine for facilitating. I'm grateful to Mellon for giving us this grant. And in terms of my former department, conspicuous in their absence, I'm not holding my breath. Thank you.
Hi. So my name is Sasha Hoffman, and I am a PhD candidate in the history department, lone historian, I think, at George Mason University over in Fairfax, Virginia. And after listening to everybody speaking here, I realized very quickly that I am very blessed to be a graduate student at the university I am at, because in many ways, by not being a Research One institution, Mason has the opportunity and the breathing space to be quite progressive. And the history department in particular has made an exceptional effort in embracing alternative academic positions and championing them with their graduate students. And that is in large part because George Mason and the history department houses the Center for History and New Media, recently renamed the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media after the founder and scholar Roy, who I unfortunately never had the chance to meet as he passed before I even thought of going to Mason. Being that as it may, that has given me a unique opportunity in order to be exposed from day one to what my options are as a graduate student, not only going into academia, but also going into an alt-ac position. Unfortunately, it's still very binary, even within Mason's very progressive and inclusive atmosphere, insofar as the training you receive and the way that you can design your program really only gives you the opportunity to either go and focus your studies towards an alt-ac position or towards traditional academia. Even within Mason's progressive environment, it's very difficult to try and maintain that environment where if you're like me, your primary goal is to go into academia, but you are open and willing and accepting to go into the alt-ac career opportunities as well. Part of what makes that possible for me and my fellow graduate students at Mason is the Center for History and New Media, which routinely takes multiple graduate students to work for them as research assistants as part of our funding package, instead of being teaching assistants. The positions are few and far between, and you have to fight for them, and you have to lobby hard to make sure that you get one, which I was lucky enough to do, and worked for the center for 3 years working on digitalhumanitiesnow.org. But Mason tries and falls short in a few other ways as well. For instance, as many of you may know, Mason started out as a commuter school, and to this day very much still is a commuter school. The PhD program specifically started out as a commuter program, with many of its students being part-time and already in the workforce and looking to increase their education for their current job opportunities. It has only been in maybe about the last 5 to 6 years that critical mass has shifted, where there are more incoming students into the history PhD department that are interested in academic track positions, opposed to being part-time and looking to further their own education. To that end, Mason does an exceptionally strong job of trying to expose their students to their options, but this is mainly done through outside resources that are not built into the program at large. It's through the Career Center, it's through the library, it's through informal brown bags at the center, which, if you are a working student or part-time, is very difficult to show up at 12 o'clock on a Wednesday for a brown bag as to what your opportunities may be. The program does have a colloquium that is required for all PhD students for 3 years, which does a very valiant effort at trying to bring in a myriad of speakers, both faculty at Mason and outside, to talk about some career opportunities and ways that you can pursue them. But again, it's very difficult to really get across what options are out there and how to pursue them specifically. How do you make sure that the training you get as a graduate student prepares you for one, the other, or in my case, potentially both career tracks? Mason also is very supportive of its faculty, of its students that want to pursue academia, routinely offering adjuncting positions once your funding runs out, if that is an option that you wish to pursue. I have taught 1 or 2 sections of Western Civ since my funding ran out a year and a half ago, which has been an eye-opening experience for me, but I very much got thrown into the deep end of, here's your section of Western Civ, have fun. So the first semester was a disaster, and it's only now my 3rd time around teaching it that I feel that I actually have a handle on it. But I did it all very much on my own. There was very little institutional support within the program, although, like I said, those brown bags, quite a few of them are towards teaching. But unfortunately, I can't make them when they are occurring. Finally, I just wanted to briefly touch on something that many of you have mentioned, which is sort of the dissertation and what does that look like and how does that help current humanities PhD students. Because of Mason's strong presence in the digital humanities, Mason has, just this semester, the history department has unanimously adopted and endorsed a guideline for digital dissertation work, both as a hybrid model, like in my case, or if students wish to give a pure digital dissertation, and what those guidelines will look like in order to make sure that the rigors of dissertation work are still upheld while embracing alternative forms of the traditional dissertation monograph. And they took very heavily MLA's guidelines as a template, and then their own experiences being a center for digital work, to put those guidelines in place so that PhD students wishing to defend with that type of work had strict, clear guidelines of what they were expected to accomplish. Finally, those opportunities that Mason affords, I feel has really given students and my fellow compatriots, 4 people I know since I've started the program have gotten jobs in the alt-ac community in the last 3 years before they've even defended their dissertation. They are PhD candidates in the history department working in the alt-ac around DC area. One of my friends is at Ford's Theater, another just recently got hired by the Smithsonian, another is at the library at Mason, and another got hired as a full-time job at the Center for History and New Media after being a research assistant there for a few years. And maybe contrary to Nikki's department, when my friend got the job at the Smithsonian, it was front page on the history department website, embracing and encouraging and applauding her achievements. So while I feel that Mason is very progressive, it sounds like, in embracing and encouraging these alternatives to academia, it still isn't perfect, and there's still quite a few things that they need to work on in order to better prepare their graduate students, I think, for having the types of CVs or the understanding of what is necessary to go into either track and be flexible enough to want to be able to go into either track.
So apologies if I'm a bit woozy as I'm speaking. 7 weeks ago, I started a new job, and now I teach on a high school schedule. So I consistently eat lunch at 11:20 or earlier in the day, and this is a huge, huge shift for me. Also, unlike Nikki, when I got this position, now I teach at Bard High School, Early College, Newark. My department was quite interested in if I could come back and tell them how I did it, because they said, how did she find this position? How did she become alt-ac? We did not have anything to do with that. We have a job placement committee. We taught her how to do a traditional job search, and we had no idea she was pursuing anything else. But I'll start by telling you a little bit more of my story. I found my experience of pursuing a PhD required a certain unfettered passion that was pursued in an immoderate way, right? I finished my PhD in English at NYU a year ago, and during that time in grad school, I gained skills that I'm told and I know are transferable to other careers outside of university teaching. But I always had the desire to teach in a university. I did. So when I found myself in the middle of an alt-ac job search and on an alt-ac panel, it's a little bit surprising to my old self. So I'm kind of reflecting now on how I got here. So last year I was a postdoctoral teaching fellow in NYU's English department. This is an initiative they started basically a year before I did it in order to address the reduced time to degree. Right? So that gave me a chance to teach classes and an opportunity to design classes for students who were joining the English major. During this time, I also ran a traditional job search, and when I found myself in the spring without the lauded tenure track job, I started researching my other options, right, and continuing to apply to other teaching positions. And I appreciated Rebecca Boylan's comment that gaining part-time teaching is also difficult, and that was certainly something that had never been addressed in my graduate program. That there's also an interview process and that schools are looking for certain qualities in someone who will be an adjunct, and that there's a different interview process, that the questions you will be asked are not the same questions that you will be asked in, say, the MLA interview. I found that out on my own, basically by going to interviews. So how to start the alt-ac job search in the middle of a traditional job search when you haven't been prepared for it. Thankfully, there are a lot of resources out there. Numerous blogs was what I used, but also my mentors and dissertation committee were able to refer me to other people. So I started a process of informational interviews with people who had left the PhD and chosen a different path to expose myself to what else is out there. In the end, I've ended up in a position that, while alternative, remains academic, in that it is teaching, right? And I think we think teaching, no matter where you're doing it or who you're teaching, is an academic position. I want to conclude my remarks just thinking of the challenges and maybe sense of loss one faces after a long commitment and passion to something that I think PhDs have, and what it's like to finish that process and to find oneself in a place one didn't imagine, right? And that studying literature actually is what has helped me through this process, right? So, thank you.